Hello, this is the Overcoming Resistance podcast, and I am your host, Louis Carell, with my co-host, Sean Mahoney. This podcast is about improving both physically and mentally when it comes to training and fitness. Our goal is to share tools that have helped us overcome the resistance we all face inside and outside of training when it comes to achieving our fitness-related goals. We are two guys with over a decade of in-the-trenches experience when it comes to getting stronger, building muscle, and getting leaner, as well as helping others do the same. We do our best to blend this experience with evidence-based practices in a way that integrates it all into our busy lives. We hope you find the things that have helped us and our peers useful as you join us on this never-ending journey. All right, man. Back again.
Hey.
Putting all these episodes out, just trying to help people. Today, I want to talk with you, someone I respect highly in regards to this, but focusing on building muscle, training that kind of focuses on that area of performance and the goals people might have related to it, fitting that into life, but also merging it with maybe the most important factors of what is quote unquote optimal. So, I wanted to go ahead and lead off and just let you kind of tell the audience a little bit about when you think about, I know you're really busy, you got a lot of stuff going on in life. Main priority lately has been building muscle. What are some of the big things you think about when it comes to building a program out?
I think about the time I'm allotted, I might get between 3 and 5 days a week. And that's for me. So I need to figure out how I can try to achieve hitting a body part twice a week optimally in my time frame I have. When I am there, I do want to train near failure. And sometimes, me personally, I like training to failure with fewer sets. But I think we can agree that training, with 1 to 2 reps in reserve is optimal and likely more optimal than training to a true failure. So I think training hard, trying to get twice a week. We discussed, once every 3 to 4 days. That could, if your schedule only fits once a week, we can discuss frequency further here, but I think trying to train a muscle twice a week at or near failure, with movements that feel good, not movements that you think you have to do to build muscle, but something that you don't experience any pain doing, that is comfortable on your joints and your muscles, and that you have a good connection doing so. I think that's it. It's really the frequency and intensity. And I used to worry a lot about the volume, trying to progress on more volume, but I think progressing on either adding weight and or reps weekly is going to be the best progression versus trying to just spin your wheels adding volume. And whether you're training a muscle group 1 time a week or 3 times a week, you're going to want to hit between 10 and 20 sets throughout that training week. So if you are training once a week, you might have a longer training session with however your split is, if you're trying to fit in all between 10 and 20 efficient working sets there. But then we can, I don't know if you want to expound on how we can split up our frequencies and our effective sets. I don't know. What are your thoughts so far?
Yeah, I think that's a good framework. And, the goal today was really to kind of help people discern maybe what are the big pillars. For someone who's new, there's a lot of stuff. I see people in the gym doing interesting progressions and drop sets and supersets and all these configurations that, they probably better spent just doing one good set near failure with a moderately heavy load somewhere between 5 and 30 reps, right? So it's kind of helped those newer people, but then experienced people too, if you've been training for a while, you probably get a lot of results from just doing stuff. We've talked about that before in our first episode, that just getting in there, doing stuff and playing, you're probably going to get a lot of results. You don't have to be perfect, but at some point, you're going to have to get closer to this quote unquote optimal to continue to get the results, because the body is just not going to be as responsive. So for experienced people, this is just some good refresh on what are some of the pillars you maybe want to focus on as the cornerstone. Now, I agree with pretty much everything you touched on. It's, well, frequency, of course, because when you grow muscle by training, when you train, you provide the stimulus for muscle growth, the nutrition, everything else is permissive. So we've talked about eating in a surplus, right? And recomping and other topics. But without the training, none of that really happens. You got to train. And so if you're stimulating the muscle at least once a week, at least you're in that ballpark. The research may lean closer to twice a week. And if you can't do once a week, maybe once every 5 days. I know you've had to do that once every 6 days, once every 4 days. Don't tie yourself to a calendar, but get that frequency as close as you can to twice a week. If you're experienced, play around with more, maybe 3 times a week, 4, depending on how you recover. But at least once a week, closer to 2 is a great place, especially if you're busy. Somewhere in there, I agree with you. Training close to failure would be ideal. That's, if it took 10 reps to fail on a set of bench press, maybe, you want to aim for 8 or 9. Do you have to go to 10? The research doesn't really say you do, but 8 or 9 just as good. So, try to get close to that. You might be able to get away with less, but I don't know how confident I would be in that right now. I would focus on, like you said, getting close to failure. And hey, if you like to train at failure or even beyond for some fun, it's okay. 10 to 20 sets is a great starting point. The research suggests that's probably a good amount of sets, which would be, a set is, basically a single unit of reps near failure with a load. I guess that's the best way I could define that. So how many times you would do that over a week? 10 to 20, good framework, good starting point. I personally can't recover from that. I actually respond really well anywhere from 5 to 8. So if you find yourself always sore, not recovering, not performing, try less. If you find yourself always feeling great, refreshed, but not getting performance either, maybe go above 20. I mean, maybe you don't respond as well. Maybe you have to do more. The volume, I agree with you. Progressive overload with training to build muscle is important. The best performance metrics you got are adding weight or reps or some combination to a movement over time. If you're doing that, you're probably building some muscle, unless it's a brand new movement you've never done. If it's something you've done plenty of times or it's simple like a curl, you're probably building muscle if you see those trends. And then how many reps would you maybe want to stick within? I suggest anywhere from 5 to 30. That's generally enough time with the right load, which would be defined as like tension on the muscle, that the sets are somewhat equivalent to one another. Could you maybe do 2 sets of 3 to equal a set of 5? Yeah, but now you have to do 2 sets. For bodybuilding, the goal is to build muscle. So you probably want to do the most efficient route of that, especially if you're busy, because I'm a busy person, you're a busy guy. So I don't want to do 2 sets when I can get away with doing 1 set for the same net outcome. And so we kind of touch on frequency, we touch on intensity in terms of reps, how many, reps you would do in a set, in terms of how close to failure, in terms of volume, maybe I have to play with that a little bit. So, I just wanted to expand a little bit on my own side, but it's pretty much the same general information that you provided. So, and then I do like that you touched on movements. So specifically movements, this isn't strength training. Strength is an expression of a skill. So if you're doing a strength movement, you have to train that movement, like powerlifting, which would be a squat, bench, deadlift. Bodybuilding, you're not tied to that. As long as the movement doesn't hurt, hits the muscle well, and you can progress on it, you're in the right realm, as long as so do you have to squat? No. Do you have to deadlift? No. Do you have to bench press? No. Don't be married to that. Find the movements that agree with you. hit the muscles that you can progress on. And so I think honestly, if people only listen this far, that's a great beginning framework
Yeah.
for anyone to prioritize. So I'm right there with you in that regard. Now, one thing I would mention when it comes to, training is, you mentioned not progressing via volume. So if you're someone who's been reading about training in the world as of late on the internet, we talked about progressive overload with either weight or reps, and that would be done in a single set, right? But some people progress their overload by doing more sets. My only issue with that is the goal should be to find how many general sets you need to do over however often you train to continue to make progress and recover. That's kind of the Goldilocks zone. If you have to add, if you're adding sets as overload, you might start to do too much training. You might not really recover. It's more like a bell curve. And you don't really want to do too little. There's not much response here. You kind of want to be somewhere in that top part. That's what you want to find as someone who's working out. And if you keep adding sets, you might push yourself over here, which again, you're ending up on the other side. And recovering and growing don't seem to be the same thing. So the more training you do beyond wherever you fall on that bell curve, that peak, the more it's going to take out of your resources to grow, to recover from the extra training. Probably not great news for people who love to train. I love to train, and I can't do a lot of volume. So I usually am holding myself back a little bit unless I train with a buddy and I just go crazy. But, you want to not think about maybe progressing via sets unless you're doing a bunch of sets, 10 to 20, and you're recovering great and you're not really getting stronger or adding reps. Maybe then try adding 1 or 2 sets the next week and then give a couple of weeks and see what happens. Then maybe I would play around with adding. But once you start finding that curve, I would just stay in it. It's probably going to go up a little bit. If you bulk, your recovery will be a little bit better. You can probably tolerate a little bit more. If you're cutting, you might have to be a little bit less. That's why it's more of a curve, not it's not 10 sets. It might be 8 to 12, right? 12 bulking, 10-ish maintenance, 8 cutting type of deal. So I've been guilty of that. Most of all of my injuries come from just doing too much volume over too long a time, not recovering, and then something goes.
And I would say that the muscle building that we're talking about is going to, because you mentioned during bulking and cutting, be applied the same, whether we're losing weight or trying to gain muscle. We're going to train the muscle the same way. The only thing that we might tailor is the intensities or the volume to account for, the fatigue that we're building up. But I don't want people to think that there's a fat cutting program in the gym. Really, we're going to, what's going to build muscle is also going to retain muscle when we're trying to lose body fat.
Perfect point. And something else I think that you would probably piggyback off that is perfect point. Yeah, it's not really a different program. It might just be slightly different amounts of things, because if you're dieting, you don't have as much energy, can't do as much, recover from it. If you're bulking, you got excess energy, you might be able to handle more, but it's a lot of the same stuff. But, one of the things with, cutting is if you are keeping the training somewhat similar, you can also track to see how your performance is doing while you're losing weight. If those numbers are declining rapidly, would you say maybe they might be losing muscle? If it's a movement you've been doing, like a dumbbell press, you're doing hundreds for 10, and then you start losing weight, and then it drops down to 90s and 85s and 80s, and it's real quick over 6 weeks. It's like,
I think you can absolutely, if you're in a moderate calorie deficit, I think you can still maintain. I think you should be able to maintain the most of your strength. And in some cases, like you said, if it's a repeated movement that you're very used to, you might be able to still add some pounds to the bar in the early phases of your diet. But if you're having it's having such an impact on your training, then I would say you're probably doing too much or doing too hard. And I think for a lot of people, we tend to do too much. So yeah, I'd agree with that. I'd say probably further down the line in your cut, you might be um, losing some strength and just maintaining the weights at some point.
And I want to ask you, because there's one other thing, because I know we have some people who probably do some strength movements, right? We both used to be power lifters, and we'll touch on strength as a specific topic later on for everyone listening. So this is really more bodybuilding, muscle building focused. But if you are someone who likes to do both, say you're a power builder, right? You like to do squat, bench, deadlift, maybe some other big movements like an overhead press. You do like the strength on those, but then you also like to do bodybuilding type movements and just
Yeah,
focusing on building. As someone who once had a squat world record in the 220s and has lost a significant amount of body weight, you mentioned that in the beginning of a diet, you probably can put some weight on the bar. You shouldn't expect too much of a change. What is your thoughts on a big movement like a squat that requires so much technique, leverage, that body mass may be such a pivotal point of that? Would you still say that they shouldn't expect much of a loss? Or would you say, hey, if the movement's real technical and your body leverage really is a factor, if you're going to lose a lot of weight, you might just have to accept some loss of performance because you're just a different person.
I would say expect some loss. So say if I were training specifically to increase my squat, and then if I shifted my training during a cut and I lose that specificity, then even just from not focusing on it, I'm going to likely lose some weight off the bar. But say I am still training specifically while dieting to lose body weight, um, I I have had my leverages change. I've had to bring my stance in. I was not able to. I mean, no one can ever stay peaked. That's the purpose of peaking for it. But I would say I stayed within 10 to 15% of my, I suppose, maybe an everyday max losing weight.
Okay, so you would say for our strength enthusiasts, even if they're losing a decent amount of weight, leverages in mind and just tailoring your technique as you leverages change, you would still expect if they're training hard, training smart, dieting right, then they would probably maintain a good chunk of that strength. So
Yeah, I think so. Dieting right though, that's the key. But a lot of us, like in the last episode we talked about nothing happens fast. When we're talking about dieting, so we kind of tied in these episodes here. But if your training remains the same, and all you're changing is the diet, yeah, there's might be some performance loss, but if you're dieting slowly, it's not going to be as drastic as you think. We get married into this idea that will no longer be strong, but I think if you still train hard and are specific towards your goals, you should be. I mean, the goal is to, for me, we talked about it before. I can't think of who mentioned. I want to say maybe Tony Genicore. He says when you're cutting weight, don't think of it as fat loss, but think of it as muscle maintenance. So if you're losing weight, think of it as muscle maintenance, and muscle maintenance is going to be through how you prioritize your training.
yeah, I like that. I like that. The goal is not just fat loss or weight loss in that way, right? It's you want to
Yeah,
maintain the muscle while losing the fat. So you're
and that's the goal when you're training during a fat loss phase, is to maintain your muscle. Maintaining your muscle is going to maintain a lot of your strength gains.
Yeah, I agree with that. I do agree with that. So, for people listening, we're talking about some context training because we kind of laid out our frameworks we both personally use when we make a program. And then we just fit the program around our life, right? With the frequency, intensity, volume, and exercise selection. Now we're trying to give some of the troubleshooting, and then focusing on progressive overload, not in sets, but in reps or weight. That's our big framework. And now we're trying to help give some troubleshooting for some of these different contexts. Now, the only other thing I would mention, it kind of goes hand in hand with the weight loss and leverages change in strength, is if your movement is highly technical and you're a power lifter, sometimes gaining weight doesn't result in an immediate strength gain too. It doesn't mean you're not gaining muscle. It just means that maybe your leverage has changed and you got to adjust form as well.
Yeah.
But, if we move away from those power builders, if you're doing bodybuilding movements, not the most technical stuff, you're not a super refined technique squat, bench, movement. What we're really saying is if you're bulking, your strength should generally go up in reps and weight if the other factors are in line. And if you're cutting, you really shouldn't expect huge changes or losses.
Yeah.
So, and then, so let me ask you. So you've been pretty busy. When it comes to maintaining, we've talked a lot about maintaining in weight loss, which would be training that's very similar and probably pretty hard,
Yeah.
similar to building. It's like you're trying to build when you're losing weight, but it just ends up in maintenance most of the time. But
Yeah.
what if you're at a busy point in your life, very busy, and now you really just need to maintain. Your calories are maintenance. Now your training needs to be maintenance because you said your life usually allows 3 to 5 days. But what
Hmm.
if it gets real busy? And I know there's plenty of people out there it's going to happen to. What if you can only train twice? How do you tackle that? Because to not train would be losing ground. And it's always tougher to make up lost ground than it is to keep where you're at. So
Yeah.
how do you, I know you've gone through phases like that. So that's why I'm
Yeah.
asking for your opinion.
So we talked about like it would be optimal to train a body part twice a week. So if I have 2 days, I would train probably full body. Another option would be upper one day and lower on the other. Just have more volume on the upper, more volume on the lower. If I have 2 days, I'll train the upper, lower, and I'll probably do one exercise for a muscle group on both days, and I'll just make sure. Hypothetically, if I was doing this, I would do 1 to 2 really hard sets. I would probably do a first set to failure and a second set to drop the weight and get some more reps and do something near failure. So maybe work to 1 to 0 reps in reserve to 2 to 1 in reserve on the second set. And but because I've been training 3 to 5 days a week, and how I do it is I would do push pull legs, like a group and then a B group. So each group would just be different exercises for some variation. I build off those. And I would train, not because we talked about marrying into a calendar. We can understand that some people are able to and prefer, and it helps them to base their training off certain days of the week. But for my chaotic schedule, I wasn't able to. So I would train push, pull, a day off, legs off. I train on and off really when my days allowed it. So I might have trained something once every 3 to 5 days, like we mentioned. But I wasn't able to do that anymore. So, as my days in the week that I'm able to have train kind of dwindled down, I've shifted to upper lower. I'll train, have an upper day, a lower day in the A and B group, and rotate them out as. So I might train again once every 3 to 5 days. I might be training body group. So I think those are just examples of splits. I think that's something as beginners we get tied up in what's the best split. There is no best split. It's what's best for you. If I would say upper lower is pretty foolproof, and that most of us are able to train a body part twice a week doing that. I personally like push pull legs. There's upper lower push pull legs. If you have 5 days a week, I mean, the options you have is endless. And if you train 2 to 3 days a week, you can do full body, those 3 days as well. So it's not exactly what split you're doing. It's how you're breaking up your training frequencies in that 10 to 20 sets a week.
Okay. Yeah, I see where I like that you kind of backscaled it too. You're like, well, if I'm really limited on time, I still try to keep in mind the things that we talked about twice a week, sets near failure, try to get some volume in, things like that. And then, as my weeks allow me to open up, I might pick whatever configuration I find enjoyable, still keeping within those pillars. So, for people that are worried about what should I be doing, full body, push pull legs, upper lower, well, honestly, whatever configuration fits your current lifestyle and allows you to stay within the realms of what's, close to optimal training, right? And that's kind of what you detailed, and I like that. And I think the big message too with people that are really maybe super busy is doing some is better than none. It doesn't take nearly as much to
Yeah.
maintain. A couple hard sets, probably going to failure if you can only do a couple hard sets, one or twice, 2 times a week, if that's all you got time for. That's going to help you maintain your progress, keep you in the gym, keep you going. So I like that you kind of focused on that when it comes to some of these training pillars. And and then it just, the only other thing that you mentioned, or I would like to mention, is maybe we want to touch on, because this is building muscle, but exercise variety. We talked about picking movements that feel good, but another question a lot of people run into, both new and experienced, is how much variety. Can I just
Yeah.
bench press twice a week? Or should I maybe do a bench press and a fly, or a bench press and an incline press? Or, should I do a stiff legged deadlift and a leg curl? Or can I just stiff legged deadlift? I think if the goal is building muscle, we probably want to use some variety in the
Absolutely.
movements. So if you're training once a week, you probably want to pick a couple different movements to divide that volume up, if your goal is to build muscle. And then if you're training twice a week, you can probably pick different movements for different days as examples, And so would you agree that it would be
Yeah, absolutely.
better for variety? And then, I'd probably also, think about, probably pairing, because again, we're talking big picture stuff. For me, I think bread and butter is compound movements.
Yeah.
So compound movements involve multiple muscle groups, lots of load. That's your squat like patterns, your hinge patterns, your presses, your pull-ups, pull downs, rows. That should probably be the pillar of the training. And then you fill in your isolation movements for the body parts that need it. Your tricep push downs, your curls, leg extensions. And you kind of fill and pair that with the big patterns to include some variety, and then also, make sure you don't leave any gaps. Is there anything with that type of framework? Do you agree, or anything you would change there?
I agree that the compound movements would be king. And I just kind of want to reiterate that it doesn't have to be a squat, bench press, and deadlift. There are variations of those compound movements to choose from, and choose the ones that adapt well for you. If barbell stiff leg deadlift does not feel good, try dumbbell stiff leg deadlift. That is a still compound movement, and most gyms have heavy enough dumbbells to make it effective. So use the variations of those compound movements. And then, so we're talking about variation, to maybe choose one of the compounds and then one of the isolation exercises, and ride those movements out for a few weeks that you choose. Don't buy into the muscle confusion. We need repeated bouts to be able to track progressive overload to gauge our gains. So don't do stiff leg barbell deadlift one day, and the next week you're doing dumbbell, and the week after you're doing a hip thrust. You have no way to gauge any progress on that. So have repeated bouts of effort on those specific movements, and log it. I use, you can notepad and paper, or they have apps. I just use the notes function on my iPhone. But dedicate a decent chunk of training time to building on those.
Perfect point. And something we definitely, I do, keep training program. I keep movements in for a while. I track them. I try to beat the progress. I try to progress each week. Let me ask you though, how long would you suggest somebody keep a movement in on average? What would be your minimum that you would suggest if somebody likes to just change training because they find it fun, And what would be your maximum?
I would say minimum 3 weeks. I would prefer 3 training weeks because, like I mentioned, my training week might extend. I might have a 9-day training week, but I'd say minimum 3 weeks. Ideally, at least 6 weeks to be able to gauge that progress on them better.
Okay, I would agree. Yeah, at least, 3 to 6 weeks, give some time for that movement to sit in and to track some progress. I would say personally for me, I think the longest I would go is until you have at least two or three, until you have, if you can probably use a movement for as long as it doesn't cause pain, and until the point where you have 3 successive workouts with all your factors taken in mind, diet, sleep, etc., and you make no progress, then I would
Yeah,
probably consider swapping it. So, that movement might be in there if you like it. It could be in there for 4 months,
six
until you
months,
hit the,
a
yeah,
year.
until,
There's some people that will do the same thing every session and they're still making progress on it. And if that's you, then keep doing it because it's working. But a lot of people need some variation, rotations, and stuff like that to stay interested in training. But I would say, dedicate at least 6 training weeks. But like you said, ride it out and as long as you can.
yeah, I think that's, you know, there's so much to training, and we'll definitely come back and talk about some more unique details. We'll talk about strength specific training. We'll talk about things like supersets to maximize
Yeah,
time in the gym. We'll talk about training beyond failure. How can you do that to maximize your time in the gym? We'll come back and touch on some of those more exotic topics. This conversation was really for everyone listening about what do we think about when we talk to people about training and our own training when it just comes to, hey, I got to put a program to paper, I got to get something working, and I want results. The simplest factors. The only other thing I'll mention is one of the questions people talk about a lot is resting periods. And for me, I
yeah,
keep it as simple as possible, which is rest as long as you need to where your cardiovascular system is not limiting you for the next set.
yeah.
That's as simple as I keep it. If it's a curl, I probably don't need to rest that long. If it's a squat, I'm going to rest longer. But once the muscle feels good to go again and my cardiovascular system's prepared, I do my next set, and it's
Yep.
going to vary per movement. I keep it simple. Um, Anything you want to add with rest time, or you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, 1 minute, 5 minutes, as long as you're not huffing and puffing into the next set, um, as long as you're not, taking, we'll touch on mile reps and intensity techniques like that.
Yeah,
In the
we'll
short
touch on that
rest
later.
periods. We'll do that later. But yeah, uh, yeah, as long as you're not huffing and puffing going into it.
Awesome. And then, um, for everyone listening, we try to keep these to 30 minutes ish on average, 30-40 minute podcasts. We understand people are busy. We're trying to give you the most gold information we can. We understand it can be sometimes tough to listen to an hour, 2 hour long podcast in one sitting, get everything together. But so we're about to wrap this one up. But the only thing I wanted to mention last is, and maybe you agree, but it's okay if reps fall set to set. If your first set's 10, your second set's 8, your third set's 6, don't worry about having to
Yeah.
be in a range 8 to 12, or, as long as you're between 5 and 30 for the first set, and then the subsequent sets are kind of in that same realm. It's okay if the reps drop because you get a little tired. I wouldn't worry about it. Everybody's a little bit different with how well they recover set to set. Some people are like 10 reps, 9 reps, 9 reps. And then, me, I'm going to do 10, 6, 5. I fatigue even if I rest. So, really trying to remove that paralysis by analysis and worrying about all these details, just like we did with the nutrition one. What are the big things? Get some progress, get some framework in, and then we'll touch on the more unique topics. And if there's any training topics people want to hear more about with regards to building muscle, let us know. Definitely let us know, and then we can touch on those in the future. Or if you want to hear us maybe expand on a topic touched here that maybe you don't feel was clear, let us know. But anything else you want to add at the
No, I
last minute, man?
think we're good, man. Next one.
All right. So we'll catch you guys on the next one. Thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a rating and review wherever you are listening, if you are listening to the audio-only version of this podcast. If on YouTube, please like, comment, and subscribe. Please let us know if you did or didn't like the episode, and all feedback is helpful. We will be releasing another episode 2 weeks from now. You can find us at Overcoming Resistance on YouTube and at Overcoming_Resistance on Instagram. Have a great day and take care.